What's up, everyone? Matt Gajewski here, back again talking some college basketball. It is March the 2nd. We are talking the Sunday slate of games, which abnormally strong at the top, and even some of these mid-major conferences coming down to the wire. We're going to get into what's important for these conferences and hopefully some edges we can find throughout the slate. We're recording this on Saturday night. A lot of the games are still going on, so we'll talk about a little bit of that more in the future as we get closer to the actual tournament. Conference tournaments start this Sunday. The really bad teams in the A-Sun, we're not going to talk about those games, but we'll get to Lipscomb when the actual teams start playing North Alabama. But let's dive into the slate we have on deck for this Sunday, and it starts out with the premier game in the Big Ten. If the NCAA tournament started today, these are the two teams from the conference you would see seeded the highest. Wisconsin takes on Michigan State. They have to go to East Lansing. The spread is 4.5 points, and the total in this game comes in at 147.5. We have some uncharacteristic fast play out of Wisconsin this year, and I don't mean like top 10 in pace, but this team is going from one of the slowest teams in the country to about a top 80 pace team. Only injury in the game is Max Klesmit. He exited their last game. I think he's going to play here. We'll talk about his status and what he means a little bit later. Resume-wise, Wisconsin's 3-3 against the top 25. They have wins over number 12 Arizona, 16 Purdue, and 22 Illinois. Awesome body of work for Wisconsin. Their worst loss actually came last weekend, where they dropped a game to number 34 Oregon, who's a very respectable team. And Wisconsin had every chance to win that game. They allowed it to go into overtime. They allowed Oregon to take a lead late in that game, and they dropped it. It is what it is. But when your worst loss is Oregon at 34, that's a pretty good body of work. Michigan State, they've basically squashed the weak schedule allegations. You look at their body of work. They started with the worst teams in the Big Ten. They looked awesome. Then they dropped 2 games, have since bounced back against basically the best of the best in this conference. They're now 5-1 against the top 25. Their only loss in the top 25 is to Kansas at number 20. They do have a few losses outside the top 25, Memphis at 46, USC at 64, and Indiana at 52. So it is streaky at times. But this body of work for Michigan State is rounding out into form. And a lot of that started last week, where they've just been handling business against most of the top 25 that is in this conference. When you look at these teams stylistically, they're both tall. They're both top 40 in effective height. Michigan State is a little taller at 19th. That extends to the glass, where they're 4th overall, and Wisconsin is 64th. But these are slight edges. We have two teams that have a good interior presence. I think the biggest gap is just offensively. Wisconsin does not prioritize attacking the glass, whereas Michigan State comes in 16th. That is a priority for them. It needs to be, because they rely on it. Motorcycle just went by. Sorry, guys. I'm sure you probably heard that. My mic is very sensitive. It's also March 1st in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I don't know what's going on. Sorry about that. Got sidetracked. The reason Michigan State relies on that rebounding offensively is because they can't shoot. They're 161st in effective field goal percentage, 347th from 3. They don't shoot a lot of threes. They're 335th in three-point rate. At least they recognize they can't shoot. But when they do, and when they miss, which is inevitable, they're awesome at cleaning it up and getting second chance opportunities. Wisconsin is a good defense. They're not elite. 37th overall. They're a little stronger inside, where they rank 59th. So it is a little tough stylistically for Michigan State here on the offensive side. On Wisconsin's offense, the Badgers are 27th in effective field goal percentage, strong inside and out. They're 56th in three-point percent, 22nd on the interior, but it's not going to be easy for them scoring as well. Michigan State is even better than Wisconsin defensively, 7th overall, 64th inside, and 4th on the perimeter. And as good as Wisconsin's been at shooting, I'm going to try to poke some holes in what they've been doing. Their best shooter is a role player. It's their backup point guard, Kamari McGee. He's hitting 54.2% of his threes. It's first nationally if you allow his sample to join everyone else. The next highest shooter, John Tonje at 39%. Third is Nolan Winter at 37%. 73 attempts. A decent sample for Nolan Winter. And he does offer some floor spacing because he can do this. But I mean, your best shooters, two of the three at least, are a backup point guard and a center. I mean, I have a little bit of questions with that. Aside from Tanjay, who has a lot of three-point attempts, there's three guys on the team, including Tanjay, that have shot over 100 threes. John Blackwell's at 34%, and Max Klesmit's at 29%. It's been a real rough year for Klesmit. I think it's time to start considering Kamari McGee elevated minutes at the expense of Klesmit. They're both playing point guard, and this might not even be a factor in the game because Klesmit is banged up. But this might be the rare instance where you insert a backup into elevated minutes and you might get more offensive production out of the backup. It's tough to extrapolate a small sample like McGee's this year, but it's at least worth mentioning that that could be the case. As far as the periphery, neither team forces a lot of turnovers. Wisconsin's outside the top 300 at turnovers forced. Michigan State is middling in these categories. I don't think it's going to be much of a factor. What a lot of this game comes down to for me is who's more effective scoring inside. I tend to think Michigan State is going to be a little better, especially with the way they attack the offensive glass and their depth. This is like a 10-man rotation, and at times I think that's a concern because Izzo is very willing to play like Zapala and some of these guys that are way outside the top 75 in efficiency in this conference. But Wisconsin doesn't have that depth. They have three players in the front court, four guards basically I'd feel comfortable using. I make this inside the 4.5. I was actually shocked when I saw this because I come into the day expecting to want to back a home Michigan State team. I'm thinking this is going to open at like 2.5, as good as Wisconsin's been themselves. And it opens at 4.5. I hesitated. I think this is playable, but I'm not going to hit this right now just because I'm not sure where it's going to move. We're making this closer to 2, just outside that number. This would be a Wisconsin play right now if you force me. So we're going to hold off on this and wait and see where it goes. And quickly on that will be decided in Discord closer to lock. Our Discord offers projections for every game, sides, totals, player projections for the major games. We're coming off a Saturday slate where we did 30 full games. It's a ton of players that were projected: points, rebounds, assists, steals, blocks, minutes, everything you could imagine. This video is only a snapshot of what we played on the slate. We play games before the slate starts and they move by the time the video comes out. We also play games right before tip-off when there's injury news. All of that is available in the Discord. If you're interested, the link is in the description. No long-term commitments there, and we'll have some tools for March Madness. Let's move on to our second Big Ten clash. Illinois takes on Michigan. We have the Michigan teams at home on this Sunday. Illinois is a 2-point underdog. The total is 159.5. Injuries: Morris Johnson's out for Illinois. Michigan, Reuben Jones and Sam Walters. I think Reuben Jones might return. He's dealing with an illness. It's been 2 games now he's missed. Generally, unless it's some weird illness, these players aren't missing more than 2 games. Resume-wise, Illinois is 2-7 in the top 25. Wins over Wisconsin at number 8 and Missouri at 11. Those came earlier in the season. They've bottomed out a little bit of late. They have some low-end wins. They've now dropped games to number 48 Northwestern, 64 USC, 47 Nebraska, and 70 Rutgers. The body of work is getting more and more questionable for Illinois as we move through the Big Ten. Michigan has not played the same level of competition. They're 2-2 against the top 25. Wins over Purdue, wins over Michigan State. And that's the thing about these big conferences now, SEC, Big Ten, ACC. You don't have home and homes, and you have scheduling lotteries. Illinois schedule's rigorous in the non-con, but on top of that, they played 9 top 25 games in conference, basically. They played, like some non-con that ranked in there too, so not all 9 were in conference, but certainly a tougher conference schedule than what Michigan has faced. Anyway, as far as Michigan goes, they had the wins over Purdue and Michigan State in the top 25. They have some losses that are questionable, 2 outside the top 50, just like Illinois. They dropped to 74 Wake Forest in non-con, and then they lost to Minnesota in overtime, who's number 90. And that's just it. This is a streaky team. Even in their last 2 games, I'm pretty sure I bet Michigan in both. One of them they covered, one of them they did not. That was against Rutgers and Nebraska. They won by 5 combined points. One of those games came down to a buzzer beater. Both came down to the wire. It's been pretty streaky with Michigan of late. As far as stylistics, both these teams are tall, top 15 in effective height, both top 34 in rebounding. Both are strong interior scoring and defense, 15th or better on the interior offensively. 25 or better on the defensive side on the interior. Just two awesome teams inside. This could be changing a little bit for Illinois specifically, who lost their best interior defender, Morris Johnson, which is putting more on Tomislav Ivasic's plate. Michigan doesn't have this problem. They have depth. Vlad Golden, Danny Wolf, both over 7 feet tall. And you even have Stetter coming in off the bench at times, who's a decent floor spacer for Michigan. But now, without Morris Johnson, you're basically forcing Ivasic to the 5. He could play a little bit of the 4 before. And now you're basically playing like Hammerkaus and Will Riley and some of these other guys who don't defend like Morris, who's just their best rim protector and a good rebounder for them as well. That's a problem, and it's just one of many for Illinois. The team is not shooting well, 327th in three-point percentage, still taking a ton of them, 31st in three-point rate. It's come down a little bit of late, but not as much as it should. Michigan is 51st in three-point defense. Michigan's good on the interior. We mentioned Wolf. We mentioned Golden. I think we're going to need an outlier shooting performance from either Ivasic or Yakusonis in this game, who are both below 34% from beyond the arc. Not something I really want to bet on in this game. On the other side, Michigan is 22nd in effective field goal. We already mentioned the Twin Towers inside. They can definitely score. But then this team is 131st in three-point percentage. Namari Burnett, Trey Donaldson are at 41 and 39% from three. You have Golden, Wolf, Stetter all grading out above average for like 7-footers shooting the 3. So you have floor spacing with Michigan offensively. The real question is, does Michigan turn the ball over and get themselves in trouble, which is what happens in a lot of their games. They force them, or they turn the ball over more than any team in the Big Ten. However, Illinois forces the fewest turnovers in the Big Ten, and they're outside the top 300 in turnovers forced. I kind of think this is not going to be a huge issue in this game. I'm not sure. We make this right on the spread. If you force me to pick it today mathematically, I guess like technically we have like a 0.01% edge on the Illinois side. Not worth betting, but I think there's a little bit more interesting angles with the size, with the offense, and the ways that you can win, and Illinois' inability to force turnovers that lead me to Michigan. We've already seen Illinois take some money. If this continues, I will be on the Michigan side, something we will look to again later in the day. Before we move on, I always forget to say this. If you like the video, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. Let me know what you like or what you don't like even about the video so we can make improvements. I do look at them all, but it helps a very young channel, one that is almost 750 subscribers away now from being able to monetize at some point. If you've watched this video for any length of time or done those things, I just want to thank you. It does mean a lot as we try to grow this, trying to, really go for it here. Memphis takes on UAB. This is a big game in the American. It's a rematch, but both of these teams are contending for first place, shockingly, and that might surprise you. But you look at the conference standings, Memphis doesn't have a big lead. They are sitting at 13-2 in conference. UAB is tied with North Texas in second at 12-3. A loss here, and things are starting to get greasy for Memphis. Not only just like the standings in conference, but their at-large chances decrease quite a bit because they've already taken on some water. This is a rematch. They played on January 26th. Memphis won 100-77. They were at home. Basically, outshot UAB, dominated them on the glass, forced more turnovers, shot 53% from three themselves. That's how you get to 100 points. Memphis is 4-1 against the top 25, beat Missouri at 11, Michigan State at 10, Clemson at 18, Ole Miss at 25. Here's where it gets bad. The losses. Number 86, Arkansas State, 171 Temple, and 128 Wichita, who might be a little misleading. That team was healthy when they played Memphis. I think they're only ranked so low because of some of the games they were forced to play without DeGray and their players, Justin Hill. UAB has not played a top 25 team this year because Memphis fell out of the top 25. UAB is 1-4 against the top 100. Their best win is against North Texas at 59 in conference. Most of their losses are respectable, but they have two outside the top 200, Vermont at 229 and Longwood at 212. Stylistically, Memphis is 192nd in effective height, 150th in rebounding. UAB is 134th in effective height, and the rebounding numbers are a little bit better than Memphis. But I think some of this comes down to offensive rebounding. Both teams are actually pretty good at it. And I think it's mainly level of competition because Memphis has the ability to do weird things with their lineup. Typically, they're playing Musa Cisse and Dane Danger at the 5, not together, but they split time there, and they're 6'11", 6'9". In the first game, we actually saw both of these players over 20 minutes. We had 25 for Danger, 22 for Cisse. We're typically not seeing them together, and they did that against UAB, and they won on the glass. UAB is reliant on Yaxel Lendenberg, which makes sense. He's 6'9". He's the best player in the conference. He's the favorite to win Player of the Year in this conference. But when you start adding extra height, that's where things get a little tough on Lendenberg, who has to do everything by himself. Offensively, Memphis is better shooting across the board. This team is actually 56th in effective field goal percentage and quietly 7th in the country in three-point percentage. 40% shooters in PJ Haggerty and Tyrese Proctor. Colby Rogers isn't far behind. UAB is a decent shooting team themselves, but the real problem is they can't defend. So you have an awesome shooting team in Memphis going against a putrid defense, a pretty good shooting team in UAB going against a good defense in Memphis. I mean, and the gap here is wide. Defensively, Memphis is 44th. UAB is 248th. UAB is 258th defending the perimeter. We just mentioned Memphis 7th in three-point shooting. I mean, this is a horrific mismatch. Turnovers forced, UAB is 306th in turnovers forced. Typically, you could get Memphis a little bit turning the ball over as long as your defense can force some of them, but UAB doesn't do that. This is a really bad stylistic matchup for UAB, and I'm not a Memphis backer. Penny Hardaway loves playing down to competition. It's a real problem. You just look at their schedule, see games, look at the games they've covered and not covered. But mathematically, I have to play a -2. I should have played it at -1, hesitated, saw the money coming quickly on Memphis. 82.4 for Memphis, 79.3 is where we make this in favor of Memphis. Even on the road, this is a stylistic matchup that suits the Tigers here. Of course, as you have noticed by now, we are talking about gambling. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. You must be 21 or older to play in most areas. All right, let's go to our next game. We're going to go to more mid-majors now because Kansas State and some of these teams aren't live to make the tournament. Northern Iowa takes on Bradley. Very important game in the Missouri Valley. Both these teams are tied for second, so it actually does make a difference. Northern Iowa won their first matchup, 83-69 on February 2nd. They were at home. They shot 45.5% from three, and they forced double the amount of turnovers in that game, something that might play a role moving forward. The only injuries in the game, Northern Iowa's Leon Bond hasn't played in a while. He did warm up for their last game, and then it was kind of Leon Bond watch for the entire contest, but he never actually checked in. So we still see Northern Iowa coming in as a 3.5-point underdog. The total in the game is 141, again, on Bradley's home court. Resume-wise, Northern Iowa is 1-6 against the top 100. They lost to Drake for the second time last weekend. That was like one of the few top 100 games you get in this conference, and it was a horrible game, a foul fest, went to OT, didn't eclipse the over in overtime. Of course, I was on that, so shame on me. But, other than that, it's not the worst body of work. They have one loss outside the top 200. It was to Valpo. They do have a 185 Southern Illinois L on the schedule too, so it's not like that's close to the 200 mark. It's at least worth mentioning. Not all roses for Northern Iowa. Bradley's 2-3 against the top 100. They have a win over Drake, very close one, 61-59. And then they also have a win over San Francisco from the West Coast Conference. So a couple good wins there. They also have some losses on top of, the loss that they already sustained in this very matchup. They lost to 156 Illinois Chicago. That's pretty good as your worst loss. They only have 3 losses outside the top 100. So I think the overall body of work is actually a little bit better for this team overall. And then from there, stylistically, Bradley, 57th in effective height, 97th in rebounding. Northern Iowa is 126th in effective height, 147th in rebounding. That gives Bradley a slight edge on the interior. Both teams are elite at shooting. Northern Iowa 21st in effective field goal, 36th from three. Bradley 5th in effective field goal, 1st from three. Both teams are also good at scoring inside. Defensively, there's not much that separates them on paper. Bradley's 126. Northern Iowa's 118. However, there are some weird stylistics within these numbers. Bradley is basically a little better defending the 2 and the 3. Northern Iowa's numbers are just propped up because they force a lot of turnovers. They're actually really bad at defending the 3. They're 252nd. So it's like that turnover gap, it really boosts their defensive numbers to the point where I have a concern, especially with Bradley on the other side just shooting the ball extremely well from 3. However, that turnover gap needs to be noted. That's what won them the first game, basically. Northern Iowa, 71st in turnovers forced. Meanwhile, Bradley, 288th in turnovers committed. I mean, this could be something that gets away from this game quickly. And it did in the first game. We saw double the amount of turnovers forced. I'm at least concerned in this game. And I don't know what wins out, because you have the turnover battle in favor of Northern Iowa, and then stuff like height and shooting versus the defensive weaknesses favoring Bradley. If Bradley can get a game plan together that somewhat mitigates the turnovers, they're the side I like in this. As you can see on the screen, we make this basically right around the spread to begin with. So it's not one that's playable mathematically, and then my leans are not strong enough where I'm going to override this. We'll wait and see where it comes in, but right now Bradley minus the 3.5 is where we're going to lean. Ivy League, we have Princeton taking on Cornell. It's a 3-point spread in favor of Cornell, a 155 total. The only injury is Malik Abdullahi for Princeton, but this is a pretty big game in the conference. Both teams are tied at 7-5 in second place. There's a big logjam up there. Yale is ahead of everyone. They're going to take first in the regular season. But then there is some nuance left to finish this out. Basically, win and you're in. Loser is still probably in, but not guaranteed, and the victory all but ensures it. So this is an important game for both teams. It's a rematch from January 25th. Cornell won 85-76 on the road. Both teams shot the ball really well from 3, but Princeton only hit 32.5% of their interior shots. Cornell won because they forced a ton of fouls, shot 34 free throws, and made 28 of them. Resume-wise, Princeton was the favorite to win this conference at the beginning of the year, so it's been a disappointing season. They're 2-2 against the top 100. They beat St. Joe's and Rutgers, both outside the top 70. And they have 4 losses that are pretty bad. 209 Wright State, 194 Texas State, 197 Brown, and 202 Dartmouth. It's still an overall respectable body of work, or at least I'd say it was, as long as they had reasonable expectations, but this team was expected to win the conference. Cornell is 0-2 against the top 100. There are only 2 opponents in the top 100. Yale twice, dropped both games to Yale. Lost one of them by 15 and one of them by 4. Cornell's best win is against 104 Samford by 2 points. They have 4 losses outside the top 200, 240 LaSalle, 237 Siena, 275 Harvard, and 202 Dartmouth. Also have Brown at 197, right on that threshold. So the body work is a little worse for Cornell. But stylistically, these teams have a lot in common. They're both basically even in height and rebounding. Both teams are outside the top 261 in effective height. Rebounding, you're at 192 and 208. So very close in rebounding for both of these teams. Slight edge Princeton's direction. Shooting wise, Cornell is ahead. They're 11th in effective field goal, 3rd on the interior scoring, and 75th from 3. Couple of 3-point shooters in Guy Ragland and Cooper Neward hitting over 40% of their 3-pointers. They can really light it up, and they can beat you in multiple ways offensively. Princeton's 180th in effective field goal percentage. Most of that's driven downward by their poor interior scoring. They're actually 103rd in 3-point percentage, and they shoot a ton of threes. They're 23rd in the country in 3-point rate. Defensively, Princeton a little ahead of Cornell, actually, a little more than a little. It is 181 to 284. That's over 100 spots better than Cornell. But there's some holes you can poke defensively for both of these teams. Concerns, I would say, Princeton's outside the top 240 in 2-point defense and 3-point defense. They just have the edge here because they force a lot more turnovers. Cornell's a little better inside than Princeton, but they're also 304th in perimeter defense. Princeton will shoot some threes against you. There are ways to beat both these teams. I think overall that turnover margin is a big advantage for Princeton, though. We mentioned that's what drives their defensive numbers up above Cornell's. But, I mean, this is a pretty big mismatch, and I think it's going to be in most games. Cornell is 209th in turnovers committed. Princeton 153 in turnovers forced. It's the exact opposite on the other side. Cornell doesn't force any turnovers. Princeton doesn't allow themselves to commit turnovers. I still think the better shooting team in Cornell makes some sense in this spot with everything on the line. I don't feel strongly about this. It's not what I'm going to play. As you can see, we make this pretty close to the number to begin with. We make it about 3.6. The number right now is 3. And part of it, my hesitation is just like going back to priors on Princeton, expecting this team to be a little better than they were. Perhaps that's just a personal flaw, and I should be taking numbers that are outside the projected spread like this. But I won't lie. I mean, like I had a hard time with Kansas State for a while. I had a hard time with Cincinnati for a while. Like these teams with expectations that just end up not living up to them. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around even when the data comes in. Always kind of just looking for buy low spots. But 25 games into the year, you kind of run out of excuses for these teams that could be potential buy lows. So anyway, let's move on to the last game where there is an actionable play. Quinnipiac takes on Merrimack. It's a 1-point spread in favor of Quinnipiac. The total is 140. No major injuries in this game. Big game in this conference where we have these teams ranked 1 and 3rd overall. Quinnipiac is trying to hold off Marist for an outright regular season title. This is a rematch from January 16th. Quinnipiac won 81-75 on their home floor. Shooting was actually pretty even between these teams, but Merrimack won the turnover battle substantially. However, Quinnipiac dominated on the glass, and I mean dominated. 15 offensive boards, out-rebounded Merrimack 45-25 in that game. Holy smokes. That's how they won the game. Just crushed them on the glass. Resume-wise, and this all requires context, this conference typically is putting out a 16 seed. So rather than talk about the top 25 like we did with the Big Ten or the top 100 like we did with the Missouri Valley, we're going to talk about the top 200, top 300 because this is one of the worst conferences in the nation. Quinnipiac is 0-4 against the top 200. Their best win is against Merrimack, who's 207. They did remain competitive against 172 Central Connecticut, who's no slouch. That team has an elite defense. But other than that, they played Yale, St. John's, St. Louis, got slaughtered by them all. That's predictable. They have 3 losses outside the top 300, Stonehill, Holy Cross, and Niagara. Merrimack is 1-6 against the top 200. They somehow beat number 106 Troy. They actually have some pretty good margin of defeats in these games. And what I mean is they hung close with Princeton at 174, hung close with Rutgers at 70, hung close with Stanford at 88. They hung close with St. Mary's at 19. They also only have 1 loss outside the top 300. That did come in their most recent game. It was against Ryder, who's 324. But this Merrimack resume is eye-opening. It's a little impressive for a team of this level of play. There's a couple stylistic differences in this game, not just turnovers and rebounds. It's a big pace clash. Quinnipiac is 17th. Merrimack is 317th. So what does that do? Both teams can't shoot at all. Quinnipiac is 293rd in effective field goal percentage. Merrimack is 274th. That extends to the perimeter where Quinnipiac is 340th at three-point percentage. Merrimack is 254th. We have some real streaky shooting teams here, some bad offensive performances. And then both teams excel on defense. Quinnipiac's 120th. Merrimack is 73rd. Merrimack is top 40 in most major defensive metrics, just straight across the board. Quinnipiac has a hole in their three-point defense. They're 329th. But Merrimack's not shooting a ton of threes well. They also don't shoot a lot altogether. Or they actually, excuse me, let me rephrase that. They will shoot a lot of threes. They won't shoot them very effectively. So you're shooting a lot of bad shots against this pretty strong defense overall. And I'm not sure Quinnipiac is just weak enough against the three where suddenly Merrimack's going to make a lot more of them. But the reason that we have this defensive number coming in is this turnover margin. Merrimack versus Quinnipiac in this spot. Quinnipiac They turn the ball over a fair amount, and Merrimack does generate the 6th most turnovers in the country. Conversely, Merrimack 18th in turnovers committed. They almost never turn the ball over. Merrimack doesn't generate a lot of turnovers. That's driving a lot of this defensive metric for Quinnipiac because their three-point defense is so bad. But I almost don't think this is a huge issue in the game. And a lot of this is because we saw this play out exactly 1-for-1 in the first contest. Yeah, it's almost exactly like you'd think. Merrimack won the turnover battle, but then Quinnipiac beat them down so badly on the glass that it didn't really even matter. A lot of second chance opportunities. And when you have two really bad shooting teams, if you have one team that can just crush on the glass, it helps you so much. I lean Quinnipiac in the sides market, but the real play I think is just under for a lot of reasons. The clash in pace, the slower team generally has an easier time dictating that. Both teams are top 120 in defense. However that comes, they're still strong metrics. Offensive efficiency is bad for both of these teams, especially bad for Merrimack. I think under 140.5 is completely fine in this spot. The current number is 140. I have no issues there. We make it below that. So that will be the second play we give you for this slate. But that'll do it. Thank you guys for watching. If you have a comment, please leave it below. Otherwise, we'll be back for Monday. And until then, good luck. We'll see you next time.